Welcome back to the Lords of Lore podcast, our flagship show of the network. I'm Matt.
I'm Luca. And I'm Will.
And this is the podcast for all things fantasy and sci-fi nerddom. Real quick, we use he, him pronouns, the three of us, because we are boring. And yeah. Anyways, today we'll be talking about fantasy aesthetics, sci-fi aesthetics, specifically a whimsical aesthetic and how that can influence a story or become part of the story or subvert expectations. Stuff like that. And we'll get into that, but only after we've done our main segments of the show here, starting off with Luca's Litany of Literature, wherein Luca has the podcast within the podcast, talks a little bit about the fantasy goings on of his week. I will bring a monster to this podcast and talk a little bit about how I would use it in the tabletop role-playing game and just some cool facts about said monster and the feelings of these two gentlemen on that monster. And then finally, we'll start off our main topic with Will's Wondrous Wisdom, wherein Will brings to the table some wondrous wisdom about the real world origins of the thing we're going to discuss. And then we will start getting sweaty about it. So without any further ado, with further ado, I do this all the time. This coming Friday, speaking of aesthetics, good friend of Luca and I's and now friend of the podcast, Ochi Olo, joins the show to talk about 2001: A Space Odyssey, one of the most aesthetically pleasing films of all time, and one of the most interesting. We sat down for a long time and what's become now probably the longest episode of Unabashed. I lost track of time and we just had so much to say about it. So check that out. That's a really great episode, and I'm sure you will like it. Now, without any further ado, let's get into Luca's Litany of Literature. What's going on, man?
Honestly, there's not much to add. I've been rereading The Sword of Kaigen in anticipation of our upcoming rumination about it. So I won't dive into any details because we will ruminate on how excellent of a story it is.
It's going to be a heavy rumination. That book sucks in the best way possible.
Yeah, so Matt just got past the climax and you're now in what would be the falling action of the story, and you are living with the pain of the result of the story. Yeah,
it's heavy.
Yeah,
I'm really excited to talk about it because it's been one of the weirdest book journeys I've experienced. I will try to not give away my feelings about the book. But
yeah, so I've only been rereading that. I listened to a couple chapters of Ubik, the sci-fi story I started last week, which is also excellent. Nothing really new to add there, except for, since we're talking about aesthetics, it has an interesting sci-fi aesthetic, which is, I think, it's popped up in a couple other works, like the way they live. For example, like there's a character named Chip, I think, and like in his apartment, it's like describing how it looks, and essentially there's a centralized computer system that requires you to pay for literally everything you do. It's like he goes to open his front door and he can't open it because he needs to pay 10 cents. Goes to open his fridge door, 5 cents. Wants to take a shower, 15 cents. And the man is broke. So it is a situation where you could essentially starve to death in your own apartment because you can't get out of it because you can't afford to pay the door, which is a super cool sci-fi aesthetic, which honestly, looking at the world right now, we might live to see that one day.
Yeah.
Peak capitalism.
Yeah. So yeah, that is an interesting aesthetic, which I hope we don't see, but honestly, it could be the near future.
Yeah, someone was telling me recently about there's some motion. It has a specific name that's going on in the States where they're basically planning on privatizing the internet.
Okay.
And my first response was, isn't it already? But no, because you can, as long as you have an internet service provider, you can type in any website. And as long as that website doesn't have a subscription service or a paywall of some sort, you can get to that website, i.e. Google. And you can Google anything. But the idea here now is to make it so that Google and all the websites Google owns, which is many, you would have to pay Google a subscription service, like a subscription fee per month to access any of the Google-owned sites, which is I mean, terrible. If I'm being honest, you would need like a package for like Google. You need a package for like, I don't know, D&D stuff. You need a package for social media. Like, I don't know. It just sounds awful. And I'm very upset with how the world works about it.
Welcome to capitalism.
Yeah. It
Anyway.
reminds me of that Bo Burnham song.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How the world works.
Not that one. That one too, but the anything all of the time.
Oh, the internet song?
Yeah.
Yes. So on that depressing note, we'll be diving into the Sword of Kaigen soon.
Yes. I have about 3 hours left in the audiobook.
Okay, yeah.
So
I like, my favorite part is the end, like the last couple of hours of it.
I just finished a chapter called The Duel.
Okay.
And then The Stranger.
Okay.
And I did a bad thing that I don't normally do. And I looked at the titles of the chapter beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know what the last chapter is called. And I'm like, how does that play into this?
What is the last chapter called?
I don't want to spoil it, but it's a character's name from a character's past.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I remember. Yeah,
and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, how does that come back up?
Okay, yeah. I know
I'm looking forward. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about that because that book has done a lot of things to me emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to get it all out.
Yep. Okay, we will dive into that at a later date. But yeah, that is what I have been reading.
Nice.
Rereading. That is the entry.
I got a question for you before we wrap up here.
Okay.
What do you feel like? It's actually been a while since I've gone back and read a science fiction book. Now, Sword of Kaigen, sort of science fiction in some aspects, based, but not the story itself, more so the world it takes
building,
place in. Yeah. Which is like pretty interesting. We'll talk about it in the show, but the author like discontinued that series. But anyways,
Sword of Kaigen?
Not the sort of, because it's a standalone, it's like a spin-off, but like
the Theonite stories. Yeah.
But do you find it difficult? Because I know you usually read like multiple things at a time. Do you find it difficult to go from fantasy to sci-fi?
Honestly, a little bit, yeah, because I've been reading like multiple fantasy books at the same time, but I haven't read a sci-fi book in like a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I did find the like not just the setting, but like the language with which characters speak is so different. And like sci-fi just has like so many of those like made up scientific words that just like it's so funny sometimes. But yeah, it is a little weird going like sci-fi fantasy. I get into the feeling where like if I'm listening or reading fantasy, I don't even want to go back to sci-fi, even though I'm really enjoying Ubik.
Yeah.
Like I don't like, since I've been listening to the Sword of Kaigen again, I'm like in that sort of aesthetic and feeling that I don't really want to like transition into something that's like so jarringly different versus like multiple fantasy stories. It's like they're similar enough that you can like sort of, weave left and right into them, but the sci-fi is like a hard, like, what do you call it? Like, turn.
Yeah, I think like especially the sci-fi book you're talking about, and with that aspect of like being like very late stage capitalism.
Yeah,
it's less of an escape, right? It's more like, fuck, that could be my life in 10 years.
Exactly.
Whereas the Sword of Kaigen, although it's fucking heavy, it's still like, oh, cool magic. Like at least there's like something where you're like, yeah, this isn't real, but the characters very much feel that way. I think I know what you're saying. It's like,
so I do actually find it a little difficult to like go between sci-fi fantasy like that, especially in the same time.
Yeah,
I have to say I prefer fantasy. I love sci-fi, but I've always been on the fantasy side more.
It's interesting because like, again, we did the interview with Ochi about 2001. We spoke a lot about sci-fi and how sci-fi is such a great way to introduce concepts that you would otherwise feel sort of I don't know what the right word to use here, but topics that are a little bit too heavy to tackle in a real world way. You can sort of exaggerate them and take them to the nth with sci-fi, and get messages across easier. But I feel the same way for fantasy.
Yes, I agree.
It's just that sci-fi, because it could technically take place in the future, or in some cases, depending on how old it is a representation of modern day life. It's just fucking terrifying, and like less so like I feel more depressed and existential when I watch a sci-fi that really fucks me up, opposed to when a fantasy like makes me feel like super emotional. I'm like, wow, that's so well written.
Yeah.
And when a sci-fi does it, I'm like, what's the point of life? Yeah. Cool. What a note to end on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And on that note, that'll be our depressing entry into the litany for today.
Okay, we're about to take a silly turn. Cool. We'll get to whimsical in a bit, but
depressing, silly, whimsical.
Yeah, it's a transition here. We got all coverage here. Now, I want to talk about a specific and not rare, I guess you could say, or obscure example of a monster. I want to talk about werewolves. So I've brought my werewolf mini. This is from, I think, a Zombicide game. I think this was from Black Plague, something or other. Luca and I used to just buy games and then paint the minis from the games and never play the games and use those minis for D&D. Until I got a 3D printer, though. You could just print minis. But I want to talk about werewolves, not because I read something really cool fantasy or I saw this mini and was like, I want to talk about this mini. I want to talk about werewolves because I've recently started rewatching the Twilight movies with my girlfriend. And
peak fantasy.
Like, it's so bad. Like, I've never read the books, so I won't judge the books, but the writing in the movies and the execution and pretty much everything about the
everything
is
awful, horrifying,
but
bad.
Some of them are so bad that they're actually entertaining, where it's like I wouldn't watch them alone, but in a group or with your significant other, it's funny to sort of be like, wow, they thought they were doing something. But I will say the werewolves in Twilight and the lore surrounding them is actually one of my favorite interpretations. Because like and you know, I'm not going to speak on behalf of indigenous people. That's what Will's for. No, I'm just kidding. But I will say, like, it is an interpretation that I actually thought was like, I'm really interested in that approach. And I know like Twilight's written by, I'm pretty sure she's just a white woman. So maybe it's a little bit of appropriative example, but for me, I thought it was cool at least seeing indigenous actors on screen, although Jacob Black is non-indigenous, or Taylor Lautner's his name in real life. It's non-indigenous. I think he's maybe like a 16th or something he's claimed. So I don't know. But it was cool, I think, you know, as Canadians to see that and to see that representation on screen, I thought was cool. But then there are legends that sort of come from those groups of people. Well, maybe you could speak on this more than I could, but there are like legends of like the skinwalkers, which was more akin to like a shapeshifter than a werewolf. And there's a legend from the Blackfoot people, I believe, called Wolfman. And that's a story where this guy has a couple wives, but they're not great wives to him. And he, oh, you're shaking your head.
Never are.
Oh, oh God. Basically, they betray him and put out a trap for him, so he falls in the hole. But these animals rally together to save him. And in doing so, he grows the head of a wolf and begins stealing the meat that the village he used to be a part of. And eventually it ends with him getting justice. His wives are tried as, anyways.
Literally me.
Literally. But yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm pretty sure most people do know, a werewolf is someone who is either has the magical ability to transform into a humanoid type wolf creature, bipedal wolf anthropomorphic thing, or someone who transforms into a wolf, and or someone who suffers from like a lycanthropy, and this is like a bad thing that they don't want to do, and it only happens when the full moon comes out. There's a lot of bad werewolf movies throughout the history of time, but I don't know. Do you guys have any favorite examples of werewolves, or what are your feelings on them in general? Go ahead, Will.
This is actually what inspired me to do the aesthetic thing for our when you're talking about like which topics. Recently I watched a movie. It's like one of my, I guess it's like my favorite like international film. It's called Brotherhood of the Wolf. It's a French film. Really good though. It served as like the inspiration for a lot of the character models for the Bloodborne game by Software. So just like that kind of like, I guess like Victorian era, like early 1800s even, like, you know, with like the tall, like coat collars and stuff like that. Yeah. And we have like the little 3-pointed hat and stuff like that, like that, like the werewolf hunter Van Helsing type look.
Right. Yeah.
So like I think like that movie does a pretty good job of it. I mean, it's kind of cheesy because it's from like, I don't know, like 2001 or something like that. So like a lot of it's kind of dated, but it's definitely one of my favorites, especially if you're like down to watch subtitles. Yeah, no, I've always loved like werewolves and that kind of stuff in fantasy and horror.
And you, Luca?
Yeah, I have no strong opinions on werewolves. I've never been like a huge fan.
I've never been a werewolf.
I've never been a werewolf, no. They're always paired with vampires for some reason, like Underworld, Twilight, other examples. But yeah, a favorite example. I mean, you're right. I don't hate the werewolf design in Twilight, like how they turn into wolves, like giant wolves. It's cool. No, I don't hate that. It's better than the humanoid. Like probably would have butchered that CGI.
Oh, yeah,
big time.
What's his face in Harry Potter? Lupin,
yeah.
Lupin, yeah. Professor Lupin. He turned
maybe
into
it is
a wolf.
Lupus. I don't know.
I've only seen the movies.
Remus. Yeah.
I watched all the movies like in a row last week.
Yeah, see, that's one more of the examples of I wish this didn't happen to me.
Yeah. I think in The Witcher there's a few werewolves in the games and the books.
Terrifying too.
Yeah, they're pretty scary in The Witcher. They're like very like the way the dude talks, like that werewolf you encounter, I just so off-putting.
Yeah, like the necromancy quest one. Yeah. It's like where like I guess like likenism is like it's like a curse in the Witcher series. So like it's just like a pretty shitty curse because like I don't think you transform back into a human.
Oh boy,
it's just like you're stuck in that form.
I thought the dude does. I haven't read the books like all the way through, so I can't be sure. But in the game, I'm pretty sure he does. Like it's like a guy that changes. Either way, it's very, very unsettling when you encounter him because he's like talking as a werewolf, like that shape. Oh, Skyrim. I never chose to be a werewolf in Skyrim, ever.
Oh, really?
No.
All the benefits it yields, immunity to poison. What?
You just didn't do that quest?
No, I did the quest. I just didn't want to be a werewolf.
Oh, I didn't know you could do the quest without being a werewolf.
No, you turn into it. I just never chose to do it later in the game.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. It to me, it's not the coolest. Just like how I don't really like druids that much. Like that's that sort of line, you know.
Okay, yeah.
If it's a willing thing, like it's like I don't want to use magic to turn into like how Will would say, like a Chad, you know, like just a super strong, like physically capable. It's like if I have magic, I want to throw magic spells, not turn myself into a giant wolf or bear and be like, now I'm strong.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me, I guess.
And not to mention that it's such like an overused
It is.
the creature in fantasy and movies in general that I have no real deep love for werewolves.
Yeah,
and
it's not doing anything for you.
yeah, and like Twilight is just such unbelievable garbage, and like that is like vampire werewolf, and I'm done with both of those creatures.
Yeah.
I'd never have to see another vampire or werewolf, and I will be completely fine with that.
I mean,
Yeah.
like with a vampire, like the one thing is like you could have a little bit more like variation, right? Like different abilities and powers and like how they contract it. Like werewolf, it's just like, hey, just turn into a wolf.
So, see, that's why I think, and this is probably the weirdest sentence I've ever said, that Twilight is a breath of fresh air, and that the werewolves in there.
Anybody's said that before.
Yeah, no, that was the first. We got our first on the podcast, put it on his shirt. But I think those werewolves are interesting because their powers come directly as a result of the existence of vampires. And they're not like the typical anthropomorphic wolf person. So I think it's like a little bit more interesting is if vampires didn't exist in that world, there wouldn't be werewolves. They did it as like a defense mechanism type of thing, or in response to. So that's an interesting origin for me. And the reason why when the story takes place that Jacob turns into one is because Edward is like around and the Cullens have come back to Forks.
Or haven't they been there for like the dude's been to high school like 25 times?
Yeah, but not in Forks. They move.
Oh,
Yeah.
Just what the fuck are you talking about?
Just such a garbage story, and so creepy, like so unbelievably pedophilic, like just so creepy.
Yeah,
I hate it so much.
The imprinting thing with the
Horrifying.
You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness monster. It's just one of the funniest scenes I've ever seen in my life. I was like hysteric, like
dude, and that CGI baby, like oh my god.
What? See, I've never seen it, so I have no idea what
it's just
talking about.
And like Edward being like this how is it? He's 300 something years old, and he's like
he's like 100. He's like 100. Well, it doesn't make it any better, but he's only like 100.
16-year-old girl. Like I'm gonna get with that. Like I've been watching you sleep. Like what are you talking about? Like
see, we did an episode of tropes that we never ended up releasing, but this was one of the ones I brought up, and that is one of my least favorite tropes in all. And I think it more so with vampires and werewolves for sure, but even in Twilight, it gets a little weird with like the baby.
And that's not a little weird. That's one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen in any media at all. Like this guy's like, yeah, I'm gonna be with your baby. Like
so he imprints on the baby, but he says like, yo, it's not like that. Like it's a werewolf thing. They like
it's like he claims her as his for the future.
Yeah.
And he's like, and she just got pregnant.
Oh my god.
Yeah, because she had a vampire baby, so like it like aged super fast. And they live for like 100 years, like a hybrid. Anyways, this is more than I thought we were talking about.
Sounds like an insane amount of gymnastics to like be like, no, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so he imprints on the baby. But he says like, oh, it's not like that. Like it's not like a romantic love. It's like I saw the baby in that moment and knew like I had to protect it. And then at the end of the movie, he goes up to like the baby's father. He's like, oh, should I call you dad? It's like, dude, what you just like explained it wasn't like that. Now you're being creepy again. Like it was so weird. It was
just trash all around.
And the weird thing too is when we did that episode on tropes, I brought up A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I always feel bad for bringing up because it's a very well written book, but it does have the same trope in that ancient elf lord falls in love with teenage girl. And both of these books are written by women. So I'm like, where's the disconnect? And like I just like I'm not making a stupid statement saying that this is like a thing women do, but like I just feel like it would be something that they were more aware of, more so than men. Like it feels like this type of book would be something that some man writes all creepy like, and then to learn that like it's women who are behind these, I'm like, what am I missing kind of thing? Like, why was this like, why totally would you like any red flags came up? Like,
boy Tolkien and like Aragon and Arwen.
Yeah, I guess that's the inverse, which I don't know if it's any less creepy, but they're both old.
Yeah, but she's also like 2,500 years old.
Yeah. But at least like when he's like 80 years old, it's like, okay, his brain's not gonna get any,
but
he's a
they
man.
like first meet when he's like 10.
That is true.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's raised in Rivendell.
Yeah, like she
that's
was
creepy.
Yeah, Aragorn's
well, like Padme and Anakin.
Yeah, but there's like I think there's like a 5-year difference between them.
Is there?
Yeah,
she is like an adult.
No,
and
she's
she meets him as a
in
child.
Phantom Menace. She's 14 and he's 9.
That's 14.
Yeah.
When is she said to be 14? She looks like she's 25.
Well, I mean, she's Natalie
I know
Portman's.
the actress looks, but like it's never mentioned that she's.
No, yeah, I don't know if it's mentioned in the movie. I think you might be right, but it is canon that's the age difference, and that's how. Because the Naboo people, their queens are elected and they're chosen as youth. I can't remember what the reason is, but yeah, she is 14, and
I definitely should have just thrown a line about that in there in that movie.
Yeah.
See, like I always thought they were like the same age. It was just like the dude who was playing Anakin just didn't hit a growth spurt yet.
Yeah.
Like
but it is a different actor who plays him in the first to the second and third.
Yeah, because he goes from being 9 years old to like 25.
Yeah, so he's 19 in the second film and she's 24.
That's okay. That's acceptable.
Yeah.
But
and then he's
Anakin's a dog.
whatever 22 in the third and she's 27 or whatever. So
yeah, definitely should have thrown out just a line about that.
I think that would have gone a long way. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyways, that'll wrap Monster Musing, so we can dive into Will's wondrous wisdom. What do you have today on whimsical fantasy? This should be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me collect myself.
Oh boy. No, this is gonna be something.
No, I was just like laughing because like it was I think we went sideways a bit the last section there. Oh yeah.
Anyways, that'll do it for our conversation on werewolves.
Went sideways and ran with it. Aesthetic. Particularly whimsical. See, like when I think of whimsical, I think of like fairy tales. That's immediately what came to mind. So like whimsical, like according to the Google machine definition, is playfully quaint or fanciful is the first and main definition. Is kind of, and like again, that's fairy tales right there. Particularly, like when I think of whimsical, I guess fantasy and fairy tales, like I would think more so like with like the British fairy tales and like folklore.
Yeah.
I'm not like 100% sure as to like why that's the case, because like for example, like Grimm's fairy tale, you know, like Frog King, Rapunzel, Cinderella, all that stuff, a lot of like Disney stuff, like that came from like I guess what is today Germany, and like I've never actually like read the actual book of the fairy tales, but like I've heard that like a lot of them, especially like in earlier I guess productions, were like super dark and like
they are
like there's like a lot of like historical interpretations of just like I don't know, just like characters just getting like mauled by like creatures and stuff. Like Goldilocks getting murdered by a bunch of bears. And like that
it was more so like it wasn't a the moral of the story wasn't like be good to people. It was like stay the fuck out of the forest, you fucking kids.
Yeah, like don't go to the woods at night.
Don't go swim in the ocean, you'll die. That's Little Mermaid. Don't go to the forest, you'll die. Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah. And like I mean, like that's kind of like what like fairy tales and I guess like folklore are like the whole point of them is to like also like entertain, but also just have like a moral / like lesson. Like I think that's why they're more popular with, or like have always been like popular with kids, I guess, in like younger ages and stuff like that, because you're kind of trying to teach them lessons of like don't go into the woods or you'll die, or don't go into the water and you'll die, like that kind of stuff. But like for some reason, like whenever I think of like more of like the British fairy tales and stuff like that. Like they definitely do seem a lot more like joyful and like cheerful, like in their, I guess, depictions. But like but they still kind of like serve the like still serve that purpose of the fairy tale to like instruct and educate and stuff like that. So like particularly, I'm just gonna say The Hobbit is the first one that comes to mind, just because The Hobbit, which was released in 1937, 37, by Tolkien. Like at that time, he was like one of the big professor boys regarding like Anglo-Saxon and like British history and stuff like that. So like he basically just took all these portions from all of like British folklore and fairy tales and etc., as well as like other European, I guess, like historical literature, like the Poetic Edda and stuff like that. But I mean, like The Hobbit is like super whimsical, right? Like there's the songs and shit every like 20 pages and people bumbling around and dwarves being buffoons and etc. I mean, right. I've also like heard that like The Hobbit was written kind of like as like an homage. It was like, or like inspired by like his relationship with his, I guess, like infant son at the time as well. Shout out to Christopher, R.I.P.
He just passed like recently, right? Like a year or so ago.
Yeah. Yeah. The other one that also comes up to mind is like Tolkien's buddy C.S. Lewis. You know, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I mean, like those ones are a little bit, I guess, like darker, like especially with the books from what I remember when I read them. But like, yeah, still like kind of the same main vein.
Yeah, those like, feel more like the old grim fairy tales.
Yeah, but like still kind of like cheerful. Like I'm thinking like Mr. Tumnus just like hanging out and like just linking up with kids in the woods.
Yeah, but even like I'm thinking of like the scene in the movie, like got really, really creepy vibes. Yeah, and we read it in class when I was a wee lad, and like a lot of that book is just like weird, creepy undertone, you know. Like,
well, it's I guess C.S. Lewis was, from what I've read, it was kind of a sketchball.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah. So like I'm not like surprised after I heard that, especially because like he definitely took some like some of like the later books from what I remembered was like kind of like questionable as well. But I've never like actually finished the whole series. But like again, just thinking like that, like I mean like Mr. Tumnus just like hanging out in the woods and stuff like that, and you have like the Victorian era like lamps like in the middle of the forest, like all this like imagery kind of thing, like goblins as like playful, like not like playful but like kind of like funny, even though they're like supposed to be like evil characters,
right?
Like the Princess and the Goblin, another British one that I think is a little bit more whimsical as well. But like when you like contrast it with like other, I guess, like fairy tales where it's just like, yeah, you'll get like mauled to death and ripped apart and have fun.
Yeah.
Enjoy Baba Yaga just smirking you in the middle of the woods and like that kind of stuff. But I mean, that's kind of what our topic is about, whimsical aesthetic.
Yeah. So yeah, let's dive into it. So I guess like you're saying before, Will, it is a matter of a lighter sort of tone, even though the subject matter can be dark or teaching sort of grim lessons. I think it's the appearance of it, but it's also the characters and how they interpret the world. And it's also, you know, it's very much a visual thing. If you can tell, if for the audio listeners, our backgrounds are all pretty bright, colorful, or like fairy tale-esque. When I think of whimsical fantasy, I go immediately to Studio Ghibli films. So behind me here is Nausicaa, which is a post-apocalyptic world, and she has this garden in her study, which is all spores of a dying planet, the Earth, I guess. But you know, these are like toxic spores. She just keeps them as like, oh, they're so pretty. It's like a very weird thing. And it's a beautiful, beautiful movie. The animation is like spectacular, but it deals with these creatures who, are the result of nuclear warfare, and these organic machines of death, these giant robots that are semi-organic, which destroyed the planet. And it deals with like things like genocide and the destruction of entire cities and stuff like that. And it basically their valley is a safe zone outside of the toxic environment. And I don't know, it's just like the way they contrast the whimsy of what happens inside the valley and outside, even whimsical outside in the toxic forest. There's like very playful scenes of her like, oh, look at this shell of this dead creature. But it's all very but I think like you were saying before, Will, I think the perspective of the whimsical fantasy is always appealing to children, or is meant to appeal to children, because we're seeing the world through the character's eyes, or at least that's the interpretation we're supposed to get. And so I feel like when you have the younger characters like Nausicaa, or like most of the characters in Studio Ghibli movies, we're seeing what the world is like to them. And in these movies particularly, there's always scenes that are just like people living life, and like the little beauties, like finding a flower or cooking your favorite meal. And they have like these fantastical aspects to them, but they're really mundane things. And I think that's whimsy. Like as a kid, you're trying to find the magic sort of in every corner of life. Whereas like when you get older, you get cynical and it's tougher to really pull things like that out. So that's where I'm coming from anyways, with the whimsical aesthetic. Luca, or sorry, go ahead, Will.
Like I was just about to say, like a good example would be like Harry Potter, like the Weasley house, where I have like, like magical like brooms like sweeping the floor and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
And like how it's shown, like especially in the movies, they're just like, this is wonderful. And then, but whereas like the parents are like, yeah, because I like made it do that, so I just don't want to do it myself.
Yeah.
Sweeping the floor sucks.
Initial thoughts on the whimsical aesthetic, Luca?
Yeah, I mean, usually find it in like stuff meant for the young adult market, or like more children's fantasy. Yeah, Harry Potter's a great example. Narnia, the Hobbit I had on my list too. If you guys remember, like Aragon also, that had like that sort of feeling to it, even though it dealt with some like mature themes. I mean, it was also written by a very young author.
Also, I just ordered the entire series. It just came in today.
Oh, really? Of the Inheritance?
Yeah.
I actually never finished it.
They're pretty good. Like I had the hardcovers of the first few, and I read it so much that they actually like split apart.
Oh wow! Like
I don't know if you guys know, the author's trying to start a campaign to get Disney to make the films over again.
Ooh,
really?
So you can go check that
Toss
out.
one up for my boy Christopher Paolini.
I'm actually wanting to read his new book, sci-fi book, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars.
Ooh,
I really want to read that.
Great name.
Yeah, I didn't finish Aragon. I didn't finish the fourth book. I got like maybe halfway through it, or like a third of the way through it. It was like at that moment where they discovered a weapon that can like kill dragons. And then they found out that like the black dragon's like immune to it. And then I was just like, oh, okay, well, this is getting like, how is he gonna like close off this story? It's like,
he does. Actually,
is the ending good?
Yeah, it was like one of my favorite endings. Like, I can't believe again that, like, I think he was probably around the age of like 22 to 25 kind of thing when he finished it. And it's just like, how did you even come up with this? Because like the ending is really good. Okay. And then thinking of where I was at age 22 was really different. So
but yeah, it's usually that like young adult fantasy that they use the whimsical sort of aesthetic to ease you into the more mature themes that it'll deal with later in the story.
Right.
Yeah. You can also find it a lot in anime.
Yes.
Like a lot, like Naruto, One Piece, Hunter x Hunter. I think Hunter x Hunter is my favorite example, because to me that's like hard fantasy in like a realistic modern world, sort of like technology wise.
Right.
And it goes from like the intro being like you're following, I think he's 12 years old, Gone, like the main character, and he like meets a group of friends, they go on their little adventure to start, and then it just like it finishes like the first couple arcs and then just like dials it up to 11 and just like this world is horrifying, like surprise.
Yeah. I feel like the whimsical aesthetic can sometimes be a detriment to the way something's like perceived by the general audience, in that like I think we've said like a bunch on this show, like a lot of people write off anime because it looks like cartoons. And it's not, but like I can understand, like I don't really think there's a huge difference between cartoons and anime besides the subject matter being more adult on the anime side. It's just a medium, and they're similar, but they're not geared towards children the same way like Western cartoons are. And so I feel like in that aspect, the whimsical aesthetic is actually doing the opposite of what's it's intended and bringing people in. And it's actually bringing in an audience that's probably not mature enough to appreciate or handle the content.
I think it works really well specifically in Hunter x Hunter because it's like if you rewatch it, and like there's like right from episode 1 you find out about a backstory of one of like characters that's like pretty horrifying. Like he comes from a tribe that was essentially wiped out, and he's like the last surviving member, and he's hunting the people that wiped his tribe out.
Right. Killua, right?
Yeah, Killua. So like right from the start is that, but like the tone of everything is very like happy because you're seeing it through the eyes of the main character. And it's like, as he sort of learns the truth of the world, it's like, then you get more of that like realism, the mature themes. I think Naruto is similar. I haven't seen all of Naruto, but
it definitely does the same thing. It starts as like a schoolyard disagreement between, like, the first episode of Naruto gets a little heavy at the end with the person using him to steal the scroll and whatnot. But still he like handles that in a whimsical way because he's like a silly dude. In the first few arcs, or at least the first arc of the show, is he's competing with a schoolmate to become a good student and get assigned to a team. And then when he does, they go on the mission it's like an escort mission. It gets hectic like right away. And they get separated from the mentor, and then that becomes like a thing where they have to actually like fight for their lives for the first time. But like it throws you right into it. And I think I've maybe on an Unabashed or on this show, I've talked about a lot of times when that change happens, like a tonal change, it's sort of representative of like children growing up and being like, oh, the world is not as whimsical as I thought it was. This shit kind of sucks. People are terrible. And I think the whimsical aesthetic really lends itself to that type of storytelling when you're able to shift the tone.
Yeah,
totally.
I think like a really good example of is actually from the Inheritance cycle, because like you have book 1, Aragon, like the titular character and his dragon, like they're kind of just like take off like on this like hero's quest journey and stuff like that, and like there's like bad stuff that happens, but that's that. But then like in the second book, because there's also like it follows like the POV from his cousin's perspective, who's like much older and like doesn't have a dragon to fly away off on. And like I remember there's like a scene where like it's like a page where it's just like describes like how like his cousin kills like the first human that he ever kills. It's like out of like self-defense, and he just like beats a soldier's like chest in with a hammer, and like that's why he gets like the hero name of like Strong Hammer. But it's like a page long, and like I remember like reading it when I was like 12, and I was like, holy fuck. Like he just like talks about like how he like hit the guy in the head and then like straddled him and just like caved his chest plate in so hard and stuff like that. Like it's like super gory, and like this is happening while like Aragon is off like doing his like being the chosen one and stuff like that. And, like meanwhile, like his like cousins, like his like older cousin is like trying to like keep the town alive and stuff like that, and forms a rebellion. And so like definitely perspective. that's why I definitely love the Studio Ghibli movies, because like Princess Mononoke is like, it's like, like Japanese fairy tale and like called traditional, like inspired, but like it's also deals with like climate change and like
Yeah.
deforestation and industrialism and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a moment in that movie, like obviously, like the beginning of that movie, you see like the demon inside the boar god type thing, and that's extremely not whimsical and creepy and scary.
Yeah,
But
terrifying as a
then
kid.
he goes on his journey and it's like bright colors, beautiful again, one of the most beautiful made movies of all time. Um, but there's a moment where he shoots with his demon arm and just fucking takes this guy's arm off. And I was like, whoa, what? Like, because everything up until then is like, oh, he's fighting a monster. And then like when you see this like human on human fight happen, and like it's so gruesome, it was like, whoa. This is a Studio Ghibli movie. What the fuck? One of my favorites of all time. But like, yeah, it's definitely like it sort of lulls you in, and then it's like boom, this like punch to the throat. I felt the exact same way with Sword of Kaigen. The first few chapters of the book are, this kid and his worldview opening up as he meets a kid who's from out of town. And I'll try not to go into details because this will be in ruminations, but then it really instantly, the realities of life and the realities of war in times of peace immediately become apparent. And it's terrible. I am so still shocked by that book. Any other examples from you guys of properties you like that do this?
I think an example of one that does it too much is One Piece, at least the animated version. The manga is different. It is much darker in some scenes, and they like tone those scenes down for the animated version, probably to be more child friendly. But I think that's one story that like also starts very, very whimsical and foolish. And because of the personality of Luffy, the main character, like it continues like that throughout the whole thing. But I think they like, especially the animated version, leans so heavily on the foolishness that it just like gets tedious, and it like sort of undercuts those heavy moments, which I don't like so much. On the opposite end, there's Hunter x Hunter that does it perfectly and beautifully. And I really, really wish that story will end at some point.
On hiatus, right?
It's always on hiatus, just like nonstop. Like it's on hiatus. I think he's been writing it for like 20 years. He's been on a hiatus for like 10 of those years. So,
oh wow.
Like, yeah, it is a struggle.
I also want to bring up like Avatar. I think is one of the best examples of it maintains that level of whimsy right up until the end. Like you always feel like
episode.
Yeah. And even then it's like right up until like the last sort of battles or fights. It's very much light toned, and there are like heavy things that happen in that series for sure, but it's always sort of contrasted or paired with light moments of like, yo, these are really just kids. And there's way too much. And I think maybe that's like one of the like the things that's like always current in like a whimsical fantasy is like, these are kids and they have too much pressure on them. And they're really trying to find like the good in the world, and like the things that they're faced with is just too much to handle, to eventually where like you need that tonal shift where it's like, yeah, this is not sunshine and rainbows anymore. Yeah.
Well, Avatar is a great example though. And speaking of Avatar, that last fight scene between Zuko and Azula, just like, oh, so good. I love the music in that scene. Just so
that show has underrated like a great score. Yeah, even the guy with his guitar, the secret tunnel guy.
Yeah, that dude. Oh, there's also that song that plays in those it always plays like when they're in the sky on Appa at the end of like a more serious episode.
Okay, yeah. I've actually remixed. I'll send you a beat I made. I like remixed the Avatar song. It's just like got stuck in my head.
Yeah, so good. Just real quick, do you guys prefer Legend of Korra or the original series?
Well, if we're talking about whimsical fantasy, I definitely feel like the first series is definitely more whimsical.
Yes.
But I do think Korra gets the room to sort of deal with more serious issues.
But like as a preference, like what did you enjoy watching more?
I think Korra hit me in a way that I wasn't expecting because of the first season.
Mhm.
And I do think it covers more ground. And I think the characters in that are a little bit because they're more mature. I think there's more to work with. So I think I do prefer Korra, but it stands on the shoulders of Avatar, and it's nothing without it. But I do think it's written. I don't know if it's a fair comparison, but it's written better. So.
No, just you personally enjoy it more. Like I personally enjoy the original series more, just slightly.
Yeah, like, and I guess enjoy is like the word I'm struggling with, because it's like if I want to watch something and just feel happy, I'll throw on the original. But if I want to be like, dive into like the lore and like the fantasy aspects and like the real world implication of those fantasy aspects, I'll watch Korra because it's deeper that way.
Yeah. Have you seen them both, Will?
Yep. Actually, I watched them, I think, in February.
Okay.
Like back to back, pretty much. I would say just Korra. I think it was like, I think the story for me was better. That was just my thing. But again, I think it was just because Avatar walked so Korra could run.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Like I think if you swap the two, I think it would probably be the exact same thing where Avatar would be better. But
I don't think it has much to do with like who the characters are, but I think because it's like they're older at the time of Korra, like those, like the main cast is older. And we see some of the old cast from that movie, and they're older as well. I just think there's like more life lessons to be learned from people who've experienced more.
It'd be cool if they did like another series, but like it was like another like generation or two ahead, and then like have like almost like, I guess, like adults kind of like.
Oh yeah,
I think that's serious.
I don't think they're going ahead, but I think they're going in between. I think season's called like the fourth, or is it fifth or fourth season of Avatar: The Last Airbender is coming out, where they're like older. I think that's being worked on right now, which is super exciting. Speaking of like going back to the whimsical thing, though, is like after, I think I've spoken about this before. After finishing The Last Airbender, I tried to go to Korra right away, and like just the first episode of being like, yeah, Aang is dead, I was like, sorry, no, I'm checking out here. I refused to accept this for about a year, and then I finally went back to it and could enjoy it. But at first it was like way too raw, and like the tonal shift was like, I don't know.
And he died way too young.
He was like 100 and
he was like 50 something.
Aang?
I mean, if you don't count the 100 years he spent frozen, not aging.
No. I think he's like fairly old, because Katara is fairly old as well, and Tenzin's like a 50-year-old man or something.
Yeah,
I think Katara is like 90 something, or
like, Aang died biological age of 66.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
What am I thinking of? Okay, well, never mind.
Way too young.
Yeah, that is way too young.
And they don't respect Tenzin enough. I'll never stop saying that.
But man, just that scene.
I will die on this hill.
Scene though of Tenzin in the spirit world is just one of the greatest.
That's all good. The characters do not respect him, and I don't respect the writers for doing it like that.
I think that's the brilliance of the show.
No,
is that
it's not.
Like,
I strongly disagree. Strongly disagree. I will die on this hill.
I think that's the thing though, is like with Aang, like there was always that whimsy, right? There was always that back and forth with the other characters because he was the youngest before Toph gets there. But like there is that like silly nature that Aang has, and the rapport they have is always sort of like childish. And I think to lose that with someone like Tenzin would be a mistake, because he is a father. He is I believe he's the youngest sibling. So I think to lose that punching bag of, yeah, we know you take yourself very seriously, but you're still our younger brother, or you're still our dad, or you're still my lame teacher. I think that is so perfect.
I didn't like it then. I didn't like it on the rewatch, and I still don't like it.
I love it. I think it's so good.
He's my favorite character in that whole show.
Because I think if they all took him seriously, that scene with him in the spirit world would be like,
not even take him seriously, just like they shit on him for wanting to preserve his father's legacy. But
when you see where they're coming from, your
father, like, all right, cool,
like with Kaya and Boomy, it's like I get it. I get why you guys are like a little bit uncomfortable with the self-importance that Tenzin puts on himself. Like, that would be tough.
Yeah, well, that's what
some people deal with that sort of thing in humor.
No, they didn't respect him enough. They didn't respect my man. Anyway, Whimsical.
Yeah.
Do you guys prefer Whimsical versus like aesthetics? I mean, more so, it's hard to sometimes get them through a book, like without seeing the like flashy, like the bright colors and the tone of voice and all these things. So this doesn't like translate very well through just reading or listening to a book. But is it your preferred aesthetic in a? I mean, I know, Matt, you love Studio Ghibli or Ghibli. I don't know which one it is. But Ghibli.
Ghibli. It's actually Schneebly. Yeah, do I prefer it? I think it does matter on the type of story you're trying to tell. Mm-hmm. What I don't like is the contrast or the opposite of Whimsical, which is like super gritty for no reason. Like, and we've definitely talked about it when we did our Lucas Linney of Literature on Grimdark. Mm-hmm. Where things that are grimdark for no fucking reason at all.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to see what the Power Rangers look like in a post-apocalyptic world. We have other stories that do that.
Yeah.
Get out of here. Keep the Power Rangers whimsical. But I do think it's an important aesthetic to maintain because, like we said before, it is a gateway in, because it is that sense of wonder of sometimes like a fantasy world just needs to exist to be something that's beautiful that everyone can appreciate. Without having to be anything other than that. And I think that's what the Studio Ghibli movies do the best, is just being like, isn't this pretty? And you're like, yeah, like I wish there was a big giant cat thing in my backyard and a cat bus and a fucking, it's just like, that's so cool. I wish my house had salt mites and weird spider things. Like I think like that childish, like, oh, if I lift up this chair, what's going to be under it? That like sense of wonder is so important to maintain, especially for children, to get them like into fantasy and keep a sense of wonder and curiosity with like children. I think it's super important to fuel their imagination so that the next generation has fantasy writers too. What do you think, Will?
I would say, I think I've said it before, maybe it was on an unreleased episode, but I am smarter than children, so
that was released.
That was released. Okay.
Yeah. I can't remember which episode, but
it was one of the
it was the world-ending events.
Oh yeah. So I mean, honestly, personally, I just do prefer, I guess, the more realistic stuff. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be like dark and depressing like Batman movies. But like, I don't know. I think just because when I watch something, I want to relate to it more. So yeah, I think it's just easier for me to like put myself into that world. I'm going to shift into the world of Aragon this weekend.
But also, that being said, The Hobbit is like your favorite fantasy work of all time, right?
Yeah, but that's also because like I read it like 20 times when I was a kid. So I think it's like that like personal historical connection to it.
Okay.
Yeah. But
and what about like, you, Luke? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, but like, I don't know, like, yeah, I don't know. Like, it just wouldn't really do it for me. Like, I definitely love the Studio Ghibli movies, but like, yeah, I don't know.
is it more like for you, whimsical aesthetic fantasy or sci-fi is more like a comforting thing, and when you're getting a new thing, you'd like it to be more grounded, or is it just
That shit's for babies. No. No, yeah, I don't know. I guess it just depends on the story that they're trying to tell. So yeah.
For me, it's like if I'm going in, if I know nothing about it and I've only seen like some images of a show or movie, or for example, The Green Knight, like that is in theaters now that I saw and we will probably be reviewing at some point. Like I got super excited just watching the trailer because it looked so like dark and maybe not grounded, sort of just like serious, like
yes, yeah,
like very serious, like it took itself seriously but not in like a lame way, like it's just, it was just a new flavor in a genre that's kind of especially in movies gotten a little bit
adultish.
Yeah, like especially with like the Hobbit trilogy movies, which were just bad all around. Like
the what?
Sorry, I've never heard of those.
Yeah, don't know what you're talking about.
Like the Aragon adaptation, which is terrible.
I actually
also.
Okay, wait, can we talk about the Hobbit for a second?
Yep, we can.
Okay, so like we've said, the book super whimsical. Actually, I don't think I've ever read through the Hobbit the book. What I had was like the graphic novel. I can't remember who illustrated it, but it's one of my favorite graphic novels of all time. I've tried to find it recently because I used to just, it was like one of those books I used to take out of my elementary library like once a month. It was just so beautiful. But so we know like the actual property itself is a whimsical fantasy, but the movies, I think because they came out after the Lord of the Rings, which is a very grounded, serious, and aesthetically rich but darker than the Hobbit book. I think like there is no way the Hobbit movies could have ever been made and appealed to anyone. Like, because I think what they tried to do is go super whimsical with them. But they also tried to be like, oh yeah, also Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, and tried to like meet in the middle, but there is no middle ground for me between those two things. Where there is like at Middle Earth as a whole, obviously the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings take place in the same universe. Not initially, but eventually. But I don't know. I don't know if there was a way to make the Hobbit and get the retention of the Lord of the Rings fans, or the film fans at least. And I don't know if there's a way to keep hold of what made the Hobbit great, which is that whimsical sense of wonder and adventure. I don't know, thoughts on that? Because like I think they tried and it was a failure, but I don't know what you would have done differently. Like, do you make the Hobbit a dark film?
Yeah, and see, like if they would have gone down that route, I think I would have disliked it even more. Because then again, it's just that dark for being the sake of dark. Because this is real world where it's dark and depressing and etc. So like, AKA every Batman movie.
Well, I mean that's true, but they're also like the fucking Batman movies from the 90s. They're like campy as all fuck.
Yo, nipples on my armor plate. Hell yeah. But
anyways, you're saying
if they basically if they would have like turned the movies into like just a word for word, I actually probably wouldn't have minded it. I think my biggest problem was just like not having like cutting some of the content and then also just like adding stuff too, which is like I think was my biggest dislike. Well, yeah.
Luca?
I think one of the issues they had was to make 3 movies out of a children's book. That was one problem they had. Because that's ridiculous. There's not enough content there for 3 full-length movies, which is why they added that female elf love story with Feely or Keely, which I don't remember which one.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
Which was just,
I think,
just garbage. I mean, Legolas, they put him in just be like, oh, remember Lord of the Rings? Like,
yeah, this guy's old now, but we can use CGI.
yeah, that's the other big issue. That's CGI everything. CGI orcs, CGI goblins, like just it looked very, very bad. Just very bad. And the other thing, I feel like they tried to keep it serious when there was dialogue, but then they had like the whimsical sort of set pieces or like action pieces with like the barrels on the river,
yeah.
like that fight with the goblins where they all fall down that bridge, like down a hill. You guys remember that? Like when they meet the Goblin King, like the big fat guy, and then like that bridge collapses and it's like all that CGI action. It's just dumb. And then like they build up this like, then you try to build up the tone to like this serious battle of the five armies. And then even in that moment, there's just so many like, what's that? What's the dwarven king, like
the
giant
comes
hammer
on the
pig.
Yeah.
Like that guy's just like one-liners. So it's just what, like, why? So I don't know how they could have even made that to like please the general fan base. I think the decision they should have made was just do the book adaptation, like do it for the fans of the book.
Yeah,
but then the studio probably would have never gone for that script.
No, not at all.
Because I do believe Guillermo del Toro was supposed to direct it.
Okay.
But the issue there, like they parted over creative differences, which is always we fired him and want to save face.
Yeah.
Or he quit and we want to save face. Because he was going for a very whimsical, I'm adapting the book. And he was adapting The Hobbit. That was The Hobbit before Lord of the Rings came out. Do you know what I mean? Like he wasn't really taking into consideration that this had to fit into a universe, which in hindsight, I think is the right approach. But I think at the time of those movies were made, there, like you say, there was no way the studio would ever have signed off on, but you mean these are not going to be a part of the Lord of the Rings? Like, then what is the point?
And they kept everything. They kept like the font of the Hobbit title card, and like
they even used some music that like there's a scene where the pale orc is coming to get what's his name, Thorin, and the eagles pick him up. And they use the ring wraith music, and it's just so like undeserved. Like, that like choir
and that whole the sequence with the necromancer and stuff, like all of that is like, even just like palette wise, it's like so dark and
which is like a really cool thing, but like does not fit at all.
It just felt strange, like just watching those movies, it feels so weird.
Yeah, like the when they went to like the prison of the ring wraiths.
Yeah,
and it's just like this weird dark cave hole thing, crevice on the side.
Like when Gandalf goes, like I actually liked like the aesthetically, I really liked how that looked, but it didn't feel connected in any way. It was like,
and you just like,
and then they like did a love story between Gandalf and Galadriel. Like, why?
That was weird too. Yeah, there's just a lot of strange creative decisions to extend the runtime unnecessarily. like it's so obviously to extend the runtime to make it 3 movies. Like let's squeeze 3 movies out of this children's book. It's children's book, like so clearly a cash grab, difficult to make. But I mean they worked. They made a lot of money.
It sure did. Okay, so let's wrap up our topic here on the whimsical fantasy aesthetics. Any final thoughts for you guys on how you feel about it, the importance, or things to check out?
For you guys, I would definitely say watch Hunter x Hunter. Fantastic. It's like 49 episodes.
It's not too bad.
Phenomenal show. Great magic system. Cool world building. In terms of whimsy and fantasy, it is the origin of fantasy, essentially. Like, so very important to fantasy, but I think we're sort of slowly growing out of it, or had enough of it. Whimsical elements are always nice to have, but I don't think we need that like fairy tale-esque fantasy anymore. I think the world of fantasy writing has solid enough foundations to move forward from it.
Well,
yeah, I don't know. That's all for babies. I don't know. Like, I mean, like personally, not 100% for me, but again, like I said earlier, depends on the story you're trying to tell. Um, Although I would check out the video game series of Fable, especially Fable 2 and Fable 3, not so much, but that's definitely like whimsical comedy fantasy gold. So yeah, I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know how I missed it earlier, but like Zelda is the ultimate whimsical fantasy.
Yeah,
Everything about it.
Fuck.
But again, it does have like those darker elements, especially, and like I think the most grim dark Zelda gets is probably like Twilight Princess, which is my favorite Zelda game. But I also love like Breath of the Wild, which the darker elements are like hidden behind how much you care and go out and search for them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Really want to play that game. I still haven't played it.
Yeah,
It's very much like playing through like a Studio Ghibli movie.
It looks phenomenal.
It's beautiful. Yeah. It's a
actually,
really cool mechanic system.
Speaking of whimsical aesthetics, Ni no Kuni is a video game that has the Studio Ghibli art style.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. I've only played the second one. Very, very good. Highly recommend.
Nice. So that'll do it here for our conversation on whimsical fantasy aesthetics. Like I was saying earlier, do look out for the episode of Unabashed on 2001: A Space Odyssey with Ochiolo. That's a really good episode. Check it out. Next Friday, look out for an episode of either Adventures or Ruminations. And if you haven't already seen our Adventures episode from last Friday, check that out as well. That was super fun. You can see our expressions on the thumbnail, and those are our genuine expressions at the end of the episode. So find out how that happened. And yeah, look out for Ruminations and the following episodes of Unabashed. And you can find this show every Tuesday. As always, I am Matt.
I'm Luca.
I am Will.
And we are the Lords of Lore.
Nice.